these kids need help, and if they keep making excuses not to do anything, it's hurting the whole province, not only our community.
Tonight, Makwa Sahgaiehcan First Nation is in a state of emergency after a rash of suicides.
Access to mental health continues to be an issue. Access to addiction services continues to be an issue, as well as intervention and prevention services in their earlier life.
The Manitoba Children's Advocate releases a new report into the deaths of youth in the province.
It will provide a framework for government to move forward cooperatively, collaborating with First Nations, with Indigenous people in this province.
And the province of British Columbia gives Royal Assent to the UNDRIP bill. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The community of Makwa Sahgaiehcan declared a state of emergency last week after a 10-year-old girl took her own life. Her mother says she is speaking up to help stop the suicides. APTN's Priscilla Wolf was in the community. She has this report.
Dorothy Angus remembers sitting right here not too long ago with her daughter Jaylin at a wake for her friend. Dorothy asked her not to take her own life like her friend did.
I said to her, promise me, don't ever do that to me. Like, don't ever do it to me. I said, because it's going to be so painful.
Sadly, last week, 10-year-old Jaylin did take her own life.
I want to know why. Like, why did she do this? What were her reasons behind doing this to herself?
Even with her recent tragedy, Angus, a teacher at the band school who knows most of the kids in the community, is speaking up because she wants the suicides to stop. She says she finds strength in speaking for her daughter. The message to parents that she wants to give is?
My message is just to go to parents, especially parents. Like, even though you don't see no signs, because we didn't, just hold your kids tightly. Let them know that they are loved so much.
Angus's message to the youth is,
anything that needs to be, they need to talk about, don't keep it in them. Like, talk to somebody. There's people out there that are going to listen. I'm her voice now, and if I don't speak out and let others know that what has happened to my little girl.
The youth in the community put together their own message. They asked Dorothy to share it.
We, the children and youth of Makwa Sahgaiehcan First Nation, are asking all of you to listen to us and open to hear what we have to say. We hope you can respect and understand our position. Right now, we see many of our adults drinking and doing drugs. You are gambling and playing bingo too much, and we feel like you are ignoring us. Please hear our cries and stop the abuse. We don't know what Native culture or traditional ways really mean. We want to be taught about our history and our traditions. Please help us to understand.
The community is grieving. Since this suicide last Thursday, there have been 9 more attempts, one as recently as today. Councillor Tommy Littlespruce says the Cree community of 1,000 people all know someone who committed suicide.
In the last 4 months, we've had 4 suicides. Can't count how many attempts. Here, right here. I can count that high, but just imagine every other day there's an attempt.
Makwa Sahgaiehcan's Chief Ronald Mitsung traveled to Regina to ask provincial government leaders for help.
I'm asking the provincial government to put a suicide strategic plan in place, and also the federal government to jump in and help us out here. If they're having trouble drafting a bill, maybe they can ask us to help them draft a bill. Do something together. Let's try to save these lives.
Whether Makwa Sahgaiehcan gets the help they need remains to be seen. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
A new report from Manitoba's Children's Advocate is providing some insight into the deaths of children and youth in the province. The organization reviewed dozens of deaths over a 4-year period to determine trends and issues when it comes to accessing services. Brittany Hobson has that story.
Manitoba's Advocate for Children and Youth reviewed 57 deaths between 2014 and 2018. Daphne Penrose says her office found common threads in the cases.
Access to mental health continues to be an issue. Access to addiction services continues to be an issue, as well as intervention and prevention services in their earlier life where situations could have been resolved before they reach a crisis point.
A report on these reviews was released this week. It showed 51 of the 57 were Indigenous. The report didn't break down manners of death by race, but it showed deaths by suicide accounted for 8 of the 57. 32 deaths occurred in the north. Penrose says each community has its own needs, but ultimately youth must be consulted to address the issues.
Or part of what needs to happen is kids need to be involved in what those services look like, and adults need to get informed from them about when you are in crisis, what do you need from us, and how can we help you move through that crisis. And I think the youth voice is missing.
The Advocate's office can only review and investigate cases where youth were receiving child welfare services within a year of their death. Penrose says it doesn't provide a complete picture.
But what we're not looking at is the rest of the children who have been seriously injured and or died and didn't have contact with CFS. So it's all of the other kids who also need a voice, and services are being provided to, and they are not receiving the services they have a right to or are entitled to.
During question period, Liberal MLA John Gerard questioned the provincial government on the report.
I note the child death review shows a deficiency in 53 of 57 case plans. Problems in case planning have been highlighted many times in recent years. My question to the Minister, what's her plan to prevent suicides? Will she ensure that the deficiencies in case planning are addressed and ensure suicide prevention is included in future case planning?
Premier Brian Pallister fielded the question, but instead of answering, brought up the upcoming Federal Child Welfare Act.
Legislation that is the most comprehensive change to child welfare in Canadian history, which has been put forward without any consultation whatsoever with any of the provincial agencies, with any of the provincial governments or ministers. Legislation which no one seems to have any idea how it will work.
Penrose also has concerns. Her office has not been involved in the development of the legislation. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Ottawa now, where the battle lines are starting to come into focus for the next sitting of Parliament. Today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singhs announced his shadow cabinet, and the NDP leader kept 2 portfolios for himself. Singh will be the NDP critic for Indigenous issues, covering both Indigenous services and Indigenous Crown relations. He'll also be the critic for intergovernmental affairs. Singh appointed veteran MP Charlie Angus as the critic for income equality, as well as the critic for Indigenous youth. The NDP dropped from 39 seats to 24 in the last election. So this shadow cabinet has many members picking up multiple critic posts, and that includes Nunavut's rookie MP. Mumilu Kukuk is taking on 2 critic roles important to Nunavummiut. She is the deputy critic for natural resources and the critic for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agencies. Known as CANOR, the Economic Development Agency received over $51 million last year to help build and stimulate the economy in all 3 territories. A dream has become a reality for people in a region of the Northwest Territories. More on that coming up after the break.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamarand, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. We have more from British Columbia and the passing into law the adoption of the principles of the UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We'll hear from an Indigenous leader and from someone from the government side. As well, Bill C-92 is set to be implemented on January 1st. That's the law which will reform Indigenous child welfare. But a lot of stakeholders involved still don't know what any details are. A child protection lawyer expresses her concerns. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Showers and +3 for Halifax, +3 with snow for St. John's, -4 and snow for Nain and Happy Valley, Goose Bay. +3 with some snow for Montreal, snow and -6 in Chibougamau. 0 with showers for Toronto, +2 and snow for Ottawa. -3 in Thunder Bay, -10 for Big Trout Lake with snow on the way. -18 under sunny skies for Churchill, 7 below and snow for God's Lake. -8 and partly cloudy for Winnipeg. Rain-snow mix and -5 for Brandon. -9 and a rain-snow mix for Estevan and Regina. -6 for North Battleford. -11 in Buffalo Narrows, La Ronge, and Uranium City. Welcome back. We're off to BC now, where the provincial UNDRIP bill has just received Royal Assent. APTN's Tina House is there covering the historic day, and she joins us now. Tina?
Thank you. We're here at the BC Legislature in Victoria, where just moments ago the United Nations for Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples became law. Joining me here today is Minister Scott Fraser. Minister, how are you feeling at this moment?
I'm excited, and I'm in disbelief because I can't believe this has happened. And we've just received Royal Assent to a piece of legislation that has not happened anywhere else in the world, and we have made history today. And by adopting the UN Declaration and bringing in the human rights of Indigenous people into law in British Columbia, it seems like that should be a no-brainer, that should have happened a long time ago. But we've done it today, and I'm hoping others will follow.
It's absolutely a momentous occasion, I know, for myself witnessing that here in the legislature. But for those across the country that are wondering now, what exactly does this mean for them and how will it affect them, and especially here in BC?
Sure. Well, the bill itself, it's Bill 41, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. It will provide a framework for government to move forward cooperatively, collaborating with First Nations, with Indigenous people in this province in a way that hasn't happened before. It provides a mechanism and a plan for working to develop an action plan together in collaboration on addressing legislation that's existing and new legislation that comes into being in this place, in this legislature, and making sure that it is in alignment with the UN Declaration, the values that are incorporated within the 46 articles of the UN Declaration.
What does this mean for big projects, say like the Trans Mountain Pipeline, where it's currently being built right now? What does this mean right now? Because there are a lot of First Nations that are opposing that pipeline.
Well, going forward, this will mean that when a project is being developed, right from the very beginning, Indigenous people that are affected in their territories, their input will be taken in a real and meaningful way, including traditional ecological Indigenous knowledge will be a part of that right from the very beginning. So if there are challenges with the project, they will be highlighted from the beginning of the project. The proponents will know those challenges. They'll have an opportunity to try to address those right from the beginning. In this way, we can build, I think, it's in no way impeding projects. Good projects will go forward in a more streamlined way. They will not be, because they'll be better projects. By being informed by Indigenous people that are affected, those good projects will move forward in a more streamlined way. And if there are challenges, the proponents will have an opportunity to address those right up front. Again, there's more transparency, more predictability and certainty on the land base. And also, we can't forget that the UN Declaration, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, is about human rights. It's about enshrining the human rights of Indigenous people into law. So it's about making this province more just. and that should not be overlooked. When we're talking, often the conversation goes to major projects, but it's a lot more than that.
Amazing. Congratulations, Minister.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Back to you in studio.
I'm so glad you're here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tina. There was good cause for celebration this week in the Sahtu region of the Northwest Territories. After decades in the making, a formal signing took place to protect 10,000 square kilometers. This means no oil, gas, and mining development in an area long scouted by big business. Our reporter Charlotte Moore Jacobs was in Fort Good Hope for what was a historic day there.
Spirits are high and ready to go. Indigenous and territorial governments are putting pen to paper to protect an area twice the size of Prince Edward Island. Tuyatha encompasses the Ramparts River and wetlands in the Sahtu region of the Northwest Territories. Those who grew up on the land, like Tommy Kakfui, are calling it a historic day.
Animals to harvest, that sustains us, and it's beautiful. It's home to a lot of people, and it has its own history.
The area will be co-managed by 4 Indigenous groups, the Kashogatane of Fort Good Hope, including the local Yamoga Land Corporation, the Fort Good Hope Métis, and the Fort Good Hope Dene Band. Bringing the dream to reality took a number of decades.
Tuyatha was identified by the Sahtu Dene and Métis back in 1993 as an important ecological and cultural area worthy of a long-term protection.
Tuyatha is home to many species at risk, like grizzly bears, boreal woodland caribou and mountain caribou, as well as wolverines and peregrine falcons. The area is west of Fort Good Hope, bordered by the Gwich'in settlement area to the west and the Mackenzie River to the east. It's pristine for hunting, trapping, and fishing.
Are you happy that it's protected from oil and gas?
Yes, very happy. Because we won't be able to go fishing and chase away all the caribou and moose. Yeah, it'll pollute our water. And
Leon Taro Jr. says he hopes to see more of his people access the land with upcoming guardianship programs.
It's good. It will help us a lot because more younger generation like my age go out trapping more and go hunting, go for wood on the land. Yeah, they should go on the land more instead of staying in town and drinking a lot. Yeah, they feel more peaceful out on the land.
The Kashogatane and the NWT are receiving $6.2 million from the Canadian Nature Fund for Tuyatha. This translates to jobs and guardianship programs.
We don't have an economic base here in the community, and any kind of resources that comes in, I'm sure we'll capitalize on it.
The ceremony is also honoring elders. The finalization of the agreement was delayed back in the summer as the Yamoga Land Corporation had yet to sign. APTN traveled there in August to hear why that area needed to be protected. John Tezele hits the water, traveling the trails of his ancestors.
Beaver and muskrat would swim by on the shore next to your camp, and when you're young like that, you think that's the whole world, that's the way the world is.
Victorina Orlias fondly reminisce about her camp life in Tuyatha.
The land belongs to us, and we don't want the newcomers to damage our land and our water.
Charlotte Moore Jacobs, APTN National News, ready to go, Fort Good Hope.
An all-new episode of APTN Investigates debuts tomorrow night. We've got a preview for you after the break.
Hi, hi! And coming up, a display of Métis pride in Montreal. Fiddling, jigging, feasting. For those who've moved from west to east, it's about holding place for community and a culture they've fought for centuries to preserve.
We love movement. We love community. We love togetherness. It's amazing that we've been able to create this community of Métis who are living in Jagmeet and Montreal.
But the question of Métis identity in Quebec is divisive at best, despite its close ties to French-Canadian culture. With self-declaration on the rise in Eastern Canada, how do the Métis in Quebec contend with the era of the so-called Quebec Métis? I'm Lindsay Richardson, and I'll explain coming up on APTN National News.
Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Sunny and -9 for high level, Peace River and Fort McMurray. -8 in Medicine Hat, 11 with snow for Lethbridge and Red Deer. Sunny on the west coast, +4 for Tofino and Vancouver, +5 in Victoria. -11 under sunny skies for Fort Nelson, +3 for Prince Rupert. -2 and snow for Old Crow, -7 for Whitehorse. 10 below for Fort Liard, Trout Lake and Yellowknife. -10 and snow for Sax Harbor, +2 for Fort McPherson. -9 in Baker Lake and Arviette, 13 below with snow for Repulse Bay. -26 in Resolute, -3 with snow for Cape Dorset. Welcome back. APTN Investigates returns tomorrow night with the conclusion of Cullen Crozier's two-part documentary, Broken Circle. The story looks at survivors of a church-run day school in the small community of Duck Bay, Manitoba, and their fight for recognition. The Duck Bay Special School number 2163 is one of more than 680 institutions that were excluded from a recent $1.4 billion settlement agreement with the federal government. Here's a preview of Broken Circle Part 2.
Canada's Indian residential school era. Generations of Indigenous children, traumatized, abused, assimilated. In the years that followed, apologies, healing, reconciliation. But what about the schools that still haven't been recognized?
The church is getting away again. I want to form a class action lawsuit that brings the church, the province, and the federal government and the crown under this class action.
How is the federal government not ultimately responsible?
They knew. They're fully responsible. They are fully responsible to rectify this matter and include everybody on a blanket situation and compensate all these people that were left out from that package. Then everything will be okay.
Is true reconciliation possible without recognition?
The federal government is arguably responsible for any of the maladies that are brought about upon the Indigenous population in Canada.
And you can catch the conclusion of Cullen Crozier's documentary, Broken Circle Part 2, tomorrow night after the news. And that is your APTN National News for this Thursday. For the very latest, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.